There's a certain kind of person who sees something beautiful and feels their heart pull toward it with an urgency that feels almost spiritual. They notice the texture of things, the promise wrapped inside objects, the life they could live if only they possessed this one more thing. They walk through stores like galleries, through websites like windows into alternate versions of themselves. They don't just shop, they dream in the language of acquisition, translate longing into transactions, convert emptiness into orders placed at 2 a.m. when the rest of the world sleeps. But if you look closer, you'll notice something that doesn't quite fit the stereotype of carelessness or frivolity. There's a precision to their desire, a specific ache they're trying to fill. They're not thoughtless, they're thinking constantly, calculating not just prices but possibilities, weighing not just costs but the emotional weight of saying no to themselves one more time. You've probably met someone like this. Maybe you've wondered why they always have the newest thing, the latest version, the limited edition that just dropped. Why their closets overflow but they still feel like they have nothing to wear. Why they can describe in detail the features of a purchase they're considering, justify it with logic that sounds almost reasonable, and then 3 weeks later barely remember why they needed it at all. Or maybe, if you're honest, you've recognized pieces of this in yourself. That moment when your finger hovers over complete purchase, and you feel your pulse quicken. That rationalization that whispers, you deserve this, you've worked hard, it's on sale, it's an investment, everyone else has won, you'll be different once you own it. What most people don't see is that this isn't just poor impulse control or financial irresponsibility. Psychologically, it's something called emotional regulation through acquisition. A learned pattern where the act of purchasing becomes a way to manage internal states that feel otherwise unmanageable. Their brain has learned to associate the moment of transaction with a flood of dopamine, that brief bright window where possibility feels like transformation, where the future self who owns this thing seems happier, more complete, more worthy than the present self who does not. At some point, probably earlier than they remember, they learned that feelings are dangerous things to sit with. That anxiety, boredom, sadness, or even just the vast emptiness of an unstructured afternoon could be filled, temporarily, beautifully, convincingly, with something new. A package arriving feels like a promise kept. A shopping bag feels like proof of agency. The moment of purchase feels like the moment they finally did something right. And here's what makes it so compelling. It works. Not forever, not in the way they hope, but it works enough to keep the pattern alive. For those few minutes, scrolling, adding to cart, entering payment information, they're not thinking about the argument they had, the deadline they're avoiding, the gnawing sense that they're somehow falling behind in a race everyone else seems to be winning. They're focused. They're decisive. They're taking action in a world that often feels like it's acting upon them. But here's where it gets complex. The same mechanism that protects them from uncomfortable emotions also traps them in a cycle they can't quite escape. They become masters of justification, of building elaborate mental architectures to support why this purchase is different, necessary, even wise. But they quietly struggle with the shame that arrives like clockwork. Sometimes hours, sometimes days later, when the spell breaks and they're left with the object itself, stripped of the meaning they projected onto it, and a bank account that's lighter than it should be. It's not that they don't understand money. It's that in the moment of desire, money feels abstract and the promise of relief feels concrete. It's not that they're materialistic. It's that they've learned to speak their needs in the only language that seems to answer back. The language of having. They don't lack discipline. They lack a different kind of tolerance. The tolerance for sitting with discomfort, for letting emptiness be empty, for allowing a want to exist without immediately rushing to satisfy it. What looks like frivolous spending is actually a sophisticated, if costly, emotional management system. What appears to be a lack of self-control is often its opposite, a desperate attempt to control the one thing they feel they can, the immediate environment, the tangible world, the things they can hold in their hands when everything else feels like it's slipping through their fingers. And isn't this where we all recognize ourselves? We all have our version of this. That thing we reach for when we can't reach inside ourselves. For some it's spending, yes, but for others it's food, or validation, or work, or scrolling, or relationships that distract us from the relationship we're avoiding with ourselves. That tension between wanting to feel better right now and wanting to build a life that feels better in the long run. Between immediate comfort and lasting peace. Psychologists call this temporal discounting, the phenomenon where the present self and the future self seem to want fundamentally different things, where the pain or pleasure that's happening now feels infinitely more real than the consequences that will arrive later. It's the human condition distilled to its essence. We know what we should do, and we do something else anyway, and then we wake up one day wondering how we got here. But there's something deeper happening beneath even this. There's what psychologists call the hedonic treadmill, the observation that we humans are remarkably bad at predicting what will actually make us happy, and even worse at remembering that the last 17 times we thought acquiring something would change how we feel, it didn't. We return to our baseline emotional state with surprising speed, but we keep believing this time will be different. For the person who can't say no to spending, this isn't stupidity. It's hope dressed in the clothes of commerce. It's the belief that they can purchase their way into a different version of themselves, and underneath that belief is something even more tender. The conviction that the version of themselves they are right now isn't quite enough. Think about what's really happening in that moment before they click buy. There's a feeling, maybe it's anxiety about being left behind, or sadness that feels too heavy to hold, or boredom that whispers that their life is somehow less than it should be, or even just the ordinary ache of being a person in a world that constantly tells you that you're incomplete, and here, conveniently, is the thing that will complete you. And in that moment, buying something feels like self-care. It feels like they're giving themselves something they need. And in a way, they need relief, they need comfort, they need evidence that they matter enough to deserve nice things. The tragedy is that the relief is real but temporary, and the cost is real but lasting. They've learned to mistake the feeling of wanting for the feeling of needing. They've learned to treat their credit card like a permission slip to exist in the way they wish they could exist. They've learned that it's easier to open their wallet than to open the door to the rooms inside themselves they've been avoiding. We all do this. We all confuse motion with progress. We all try to fill voids with things that can't possibly fill them. We all know better and do it anyway because knowing isn't the same as feeling, and in the moment what we feel is the pull, the promise, the seductive whisper that this will make it better. The person who overspends isn't broken. They're human in a world that has monetized every human vulnerability, that has turned every insecurity into a market opportunity, that bombards them with thousands of messages daily suggesting that they would be happier, more attractive, more successful, more loved if they just owned this thing. They're trying to solve an internal problem with an external solution, and that's not a moral failing. It's a confusion that our entire economy depends upon. But here's what they haven't realized yet. The thing they're really searching for can't be purchased. They're looking for worthiness in a shopping cart. They're looking for peace in a package. They're looking for proof that they deserve good things by accumulating good things, when the truth is that their worthiness exists independently of what they own. It always has. The spending isn't really about the things at all. It's about the gap between who they are and who they wish they were, and they've learned to believe that gap can be bridged with the right purchase. But that gap, it's made of old pain, of messages they internalized about their value, of moments when they felt invisible or inadequate and learned to associate being seen with having something worth seeing. And maybe that's the saddest part. They're not shallow. They're the opposite. They feel so deeply that they've had to find ways to not feel at all, and spending is one of those ways. It numbs and excites simultaneously. It creates enough stimulation to drown out the quieter voices that are trying to tell them something they're not ready to hear. Those voices are saying, "You don't need more things, you need more of yourself. You don't need a better wardrobe, you need to believe you're worth something without one. You don't need the upgraded version, you need to stop treating yourself like the discount model." But arriving at that understanding requires something more difficult than any purchase. It requires sitting still with themselves. It requires feeling the feelings they've been outsourcing to checkout pages. It requires learning that boredom isn't an emergency, that sadness isn't a problem to be solved with same-day shipping, that the emptiness they feel isn't a space to be filled, but maybe a space to be explored. So if you are this person, if you've ever felt the shame of hiding purchases or deleting confirmation emails before your partner sees them, if you've ever caught yourself refreshing tracking information on a package like it contains your salvation, if you've ever wondered why you can't seem to stop even though you know you should, know this: you're not weak. You're not broken. You're not irresponsible or shallow or any of the other labels you've applied to yourself in moments of clarity and regret. You're someone who learned to meet your needs in the only way you knew how. You're someone who's been trying to love yourself through the act of giving yourself things, which isn't wrong, it's just incomplete. You're someone whose heart is hungry for something real, and you've been feeding it something that looks like nourishment but doesn't quite sustain. And here's what I want you to understand: the fact that you feel guilty about it means you're aware. The fact that you want to change means you haven't given up. The fact that it's hard means you're not doing this casually. You're doing it because on some level, it's meeting a need, and figuring out how to meet that need differently is going to require patience and compassion, not judgment and shame. The things you buy can't make you whole because you already are whole. The person you're trying to become through acquisition already exists. It's just buried under layers of messages about what you should want, what you should be, what you should have to prove that you matter. What if the thing you've been searching for in every shopping cart, every wish list, every treat yourself purchase isn't out there at all? What if it's been inside you the entire time, waiting not to be purchased but to be remembered? You don't need to become someone who never wants things. You need to become someone who can want things without needing them to justify your existence. You need to build a relationship with yourself that's strong enough to contain discomfort without immediately reaching for relief. You need to learn that you can survive the feeling of wanting without satisfying it, and that survival, that tolerance, is where freedom actually lives. This won't happen overnight. You'll slip. You'll buy things you don't need because old patterns die slowly, and that's okay. What matters is that you start noticing the moment before the purchase. The feeling that's driving it. The need you're trying to meet. And instead of judging yourself for having that need, what if you just acknowledged it? What if you said, "I feel anxious, or I feel inadequate, or I feel empty, and I want to buy something to make this feeling go away." And then, and this is the hardest part, what if you didn't? What if you let the feeling be there, uncomfortable and urgent, and you discovered that you could survive it? That it would pass, as all feelings do, and you'd still be here, still intact, still worthy, even without the thing you wanted? That's not deprivation. That's liberation. That's the moment you discover that you're not dependent on external things to regulate your internal world. That's the moment the cage door opens, even if it takes time to believe you're allowed to leave. There's a version of you that exists beyond this pattern. A version that can walk through a store or scroll through a website and feel desire without urgency, want without desperation. A version that knows the difference between something you'd enjoy having and something you believe you need to be okay. That version isn't someone you have to buy your way into becoming. That version is who you become when you stop trying to purchase peace and start practicing it instead. So yes, You're the person who struggles to say no to spending. But you're also the person who's reading this, which means you're asking questions, seeking understanding, wanting something more than the temporary relief of another package arriving at your door. And maybe that's the most beautiful part, that after all the purchases, all the justifications, all the cycles of desire and regret, what remains is simply this: a person who wants to be free. A person who's tired of using money to have conversations they should be having with themselves. A person who's ready to discover that they've always been enough, that they've always contained everything they've been searching for, and that the journey isn't about learning to want less, it's about learning to need differently. The things will always be there, glittering and promising and seductive. The difference will be that you'll see them for what they are. Just things. Beautiful perhaps, useful maybe, but not capable of transforming you into someone worthy of love and peace and contentment. You already are that person. You've just been looking for yourself in all the wrong places.